I used to believe that wealth was the measure of success. For most of my life, I worked tirelessly, waking before dawn and returning home long after the sun had disappeared behind the city skyline. My name is Samuel, and for over 40 years, I built an empire. One deal, one risk, one long night at a time. People respected me, envied me even. They said I had the perfect life, the mansion on the hill, the luxury cars, the private dinners where everyone knew my name. But beneath that polished exterior was a man who couldn't remember the last time he'd truly smiled. Money had filled my pockets, but it had emptied my soul. It all began to change the day I took a different route home. My driver was sick, so I decided to walk. I thought a bit of fresh air might clear my head. That's when I saw her, a little girl, maybe 7 or 8, sitting on the sidewalk near the corner bakery. Her clothes were torn, her hair tangled, and she clutched a small, broken doll in her hands. I passed her without a word at first, but something made me stop. I turned around and saw her digging through a trash bin for scraps. That image, it pierced through me like a knife. That night, I couldn't sleep. The girl's face haunted me. I kept wondering what her story was, what kind of world we lived in, where a child had to scavenge for food while people like me dined on plates worth more than her family's rent. The next morning, instead of going to my office, I went back to that street corner. The girl was gone, but the emptiness she left behind stayed. That's when the thought first crossed my mind. What was all my wealth for if it couldn't change something that simple? A few days later, I found myself visiting a homeless shelter downtown. It wasn't something I had ever done before. The air was thick, with a strange mix of sorrow and warmth. Volunteers moved around, offering soup and blankets. A man with weary eyes smiled at me and said, "You here to help or to hide?" His words caught me off guard. I muttered something vague, but his question lingered. Help or hide? That was exactly what I'd been doing. Hiding behind my success, pretending it meant something. Weeks passed, and my visits became frequent. I started quietly donating money. At first, small amounts, then more. But money alone didn't feel like enough. I wanted to feel the difference. I began serving meals, talking to people, listening to stories of loss, hope, and survival. And in those conversations, I found something I'd forgotten existed: human connection. Then came the day that changed everything. I remember standing in my office, looking out at the skyline I once conquered, and realizing none of it brought me joy anymore. The girl's image flashed in my mind again, and suddenly, the thought didn't feel so crazy. What if I gave it all away? Not just donations or checks, but everything. My house, my cars, my investments, my possessions. What if I started over with nothing, just to see what it meant to live again? When I told my lawyer and accountant, they thought I'd lost my mind. My friends called it a midlife crisis, though I was well past middle age. My own family begged me to reconsider. "Dad, you worked your whole life for this," my son shouted. "You can't just throw it away." But to me, it wasn't throwing it away. It was setting it free. I wanted to see my wealth in motion, in action, in people's lives. So, I did it. I signed over everything. The mansion was sold, the art auctioned, the cars donated. The money was split across several charities, schools, shelters, and community kitchens. News spread fast, and soon everyone in the city was talking about the eccentric millionaire who gave it all away. Some called me noble, others called me a fool. I didn't care. For the first time in decades, I felt light, unburdened. But what happened next? I could never have predicted. 2 weeks after the donations, I walked into the same shelter I'd often visited. Only this time, the staff seemed nervous. The director pulled me aside and whispered, "There's been trouble." Apparently, one of the organizations I'd donated to had misused the funds, lining their own pockets instead of helping the people they claimed to serve. The story broke in the local news, and soon, my act of kindness became a scandal. People started questioning my intentions. Maybe he did it for attention, they said. Maybe it's a tax stunt. My phone was flooded with journalists wanting comments, old business associates calling to say, "I told you so." Even some of the shelters began turning me away, afraid of the negative publicity. For the first time, I felt what it was like to lose everything, not just possessions, but reputation, trust, belonging. I found myself sitting alone on a park bench, watching people walk by as if I were invisible. A cruel twist, I thought, for a man who once couldn't walk a block without someone knowing his name. But even in that low moment, something inside me refused to give up, because I hadn't done it for fame or recognition. I'd done it for that little girl, for the faces I'd seen in the shelters, for the people who'd taught me that life was about giving, not having. I decided then that I wouldn't let corruption or cynicism steal the purpose behind my act. So I went back, not to the donors or charities, but to the streets. I started helping directly, buying meals, funding small local projects, fixing roofs for struggling families. No middlemen, no press, no headlines, just me and the people. And slowly, something began to shift. The community noticed. Volunteers joined. A local cafe owner offered free coffee for the poor every morning. A teacher started a reading program. The ripples were small, but they spread. One evening, as I was helping repaint a rundown community center, a young woman approached me with a box of pastries. She looked familiar. "You probably don't remember me," she said softly. "You gave me food once, a long time ago. I was that little girl on the sidewalk." My heart stopped. It was her, the same girl from years ago. She'd grown into a confident, smiling woman. "You changed my life," she said, her voice trembling. "Now I work here, helping others, because someone once showed me kindness." I didn't have words. For a man who once thought wealth defined him, that moment made me richer than I'd ever been. She told me her name was Lily. As she spoke, I noticed how her eyes carried both pain and peace, the kind that only comes from having lived through struggle and found purpose on the other side. She explained how that one moment, that single act of kindness years ago, had changed the entire course of her life. After that day, she said, a volunteer from the shelter found me, took me in, and helped me finish school. I promised myself that one day I'd come back to help others, the same way someone helped me. Her words hit me deeper than I could express. I realized then that the true power of giving isn't in the grand gestures, but in the small, quiet moments that ripple through time. That night, as I walked home, not to a mansion, but to a small rented apartment, I couldn't stop thinking about how life had come full circle. I had once believed that the world rewarded only those who took, but now I saw it clearly. The real reward comes when you give without expectation. Still, I couldn't ignore the bitterness of how the public viewed me. The city that once celebrated me now whispered behind my back. The headlines that once called me a visionary now branded me as the naive old man who lost everything. A few days later, something unexpected happened. A group of young people showed up outside the community center, holding signs that read, "Thank you, Mr. Harris." I had never seen them before. They told me they had started a social media campaign to restore the truth about my story. "We saw what you did," one of them said. "People need to know the good you've done, not just the scandal." I was taken aback, strangers standing up for me, not because they owed me anything, but because they believed in what I'd done. Soon, the movement grew. Videos began circulating online, showing the real impact of my donations, the schools that had been repaired, the elderly homes that had been saved, the food programs that were feeding thousands. For every negative headline, there were now hundreds of voices rising to tell the truth. I didn't seek the spotlight, but somehow it found me again. Only this time, it wasn't about wealth or status. It was about humanity. Then, one morning, I received a letter. It was from the mayor's office. My heart raced as I unfolded it. They were inviting me to attend a public ceremony honoring community contributors. At first, I hesitated. I didn't want recognition, but Lily urged me to go. "It's not about you," she said. "It's about showing people that kindness matters, even when the world doubts it." Her words reminded me of the lesson I'd nearly forgotten, that sometimes standing up and showing your truth isn't pride, it's purpose. The day of the ceremony, the hall was filled with people, journalists, city officials, volunteers, and ordinary citizens. As I walked to the stage, a murmur spread through the crowd. I saw familiar faces, old business associates, neighbors, even my son, standing near the back, arms crossed but eyes softening. The mayor gave a brief introduction, recounting the story of how one man's generosity had sparked a wave of change throughout the city. Then he handed me the microphone. I took a deep breath and looked out at the sea of faces. "I'm not a hero," I began. I'm just a man who spent most of his life chasing the wrong things. I thought success was about accumulation, but real success is about connection, about knowing that what you do with your time, your heart, and yes, your money, can make someone else's world a little brighter. The room was silent, every word echoing with the weight of experience. I didn't lose everything, I continued softly. I gained something money could never buy, peace. After the ceremony, people lined up to speak to me. Some thanked me. Others shared their own stories of how they'd started giving back because of what they'd seen. Even my son approached, hesitant at first. "Dad," he said quietly, "I didn't understand before. I thought you were throwing your life away. But now, I see what you were trying to do." For the first time in years, I saw tears in his eyes. We embraced, and in that hug, all the years of distance and misunderstanding began to dissolve. But life, as it always does, had another twist waiting. A month after the ceremony, I received a call from a journalist asking for an interview. She wanted to document my journey in a documentary about redemption and purpose. I refused at first. I didn't want fame. But she insisted, saying, "This isn't about you. It's about inspiring others to believe that it's never too late to make a difference." Reluctantly, I agreed. The documentary aired 3 months later. To my surprise, it went viral. Millions of views poured in within days. People from around the world reached out, some sharing their gratitude, others saying they'd decided to change their lives because of my story. Donations to local charities skyrocketed. Community initiatives were launched in dozens of cities. It was as if one man's fall from grace had ignited a global flame of compassion. But the part that touched me most wasn't the fame or recognition. It was the letters, handwritten notes from children, the elderly, and families who'd found hope in their darkest hours. One letter, in particular, stood out. It was from a young boy who wrote, "Dear Mr. Harris, I saw your story on TV. My mom and I live in a shelter, but now I help her hand out food to others. One day, I want to be like you." That single letter made every hardship, every moment of doubt, every sacrifice worth it. A few days later, I received an invitation from a local school. The principal asked if I'd come speak to the students about compassion and resilience. I hesitated. Public speaking had never been my strength, but something in me said yes. Maybe it was time to pass the flame. When I arrived, the school auditorium was filled with children. Their curious eyes followed me as I walked to the stage. The principal introduced me as a man who proved that one person can change an entire city. I cleared my throat and began, "When I was your age, I thought strength came from success, from being the best, from having more than others. But now I know that real strength comes from kindness, from the courage to care when others turn away." The room was silent, every face focused. I told them stories about Lily, about the soup kitchen, about the letters I'd received. But more importantly, I told them about my mistakes. I used to chase money, I said, thinking it would make me feel whole. But every dollar I earned built walls instead of bridges. It took losing everything to see that the only real wealth you can keep is the love you give. After the speech, a little boy came up to me. He couldn't have been older than 10. "Mr. Harris," he said shyly, "my dad always says money's the only thing that matters, but I think you're right." I smiled and patted his shoulder. "Hold on to that, son," I said. "It'll make you richer than any bank ever could." That night, as I walked home, the city lights shimmered like stars on the pavement. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like an old man looking back. I felt like someone looking forward. There was still more to do, more lives to touch. My story wasn't over. The next morning, I sat at my desk and began writing letters, personal letters, to the organizations I'd once supported. I asked them to form a coalition, a network that would work together to help not just the poor, but the forgotten, the elderly, the homeless, the overlooked. I called it the Giving Circle. Within weeks, dozens of groups joined. Soon, hundreds of volunteers began operating across the city. Food drives, mentorship programs, health outreach, all under one umbrella of kindness. It was bigger than me now, and that's what made it beautiful. Then, something extraordinary happened. One of the nation's largest foundations heard about the Giving Circle and offered a partnership. They wanted to expand it nationwide. My first instinct was to refuse. I didn't want bureaucracy or fame tainting the mission. But after several meetings, I realized their intentions were pure. They wanted to amplify the message, not control it. Months later, the giving circle spread across the country. Cities that had never met me were now holding their own kindness festivals, celebrating generosity and empathy. The same news outlets that had once ridiculed me were now running features titled, "The Man Who Turned Loss into Legacy." But even amid the success, I remained grounded. I still visited the park every morning. I still spent my afternoons helping at the community center. And every Sunday, I'd meet Lily and a few other volunteers for coffee. We'd talk about life, about the people we'd met, about how the world was slowly, quietly, becoming softer. One day, as we sat laughing, Lily looked at me seriously and said, "You know, Mr. Harris, you've started a movement. You've changed lives, but you've also changed yourself." I looked at her, puzzled. She smiled. "You used to look like a man who was running from his past. Now, you look like someone who's finally made peace with it." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I just smiled and said, maybe peace was what I was chasing all along. Later that night, as I sat by my window, watching the moonlight touch the statue in the distance, I thought about how far life had brought me. The young, ambitious man who once believed in power and prestige had been replaced by someone who understood the quiet magic of humility. I had fallen, yes, but that fall had taught me to see the world from a place most people never reach, the ground, where real hearts live. I realized that my story, all the pain, loss, and rediscovery, wasn't mine alone. It belonged to everyone who had ever lost their way and found it again through compassion. And in that realization, I felt something shift inside me. A deep calm, like the final page of a long book closing softly. For weeks after the news spread, people began to look at me differently. Shopkeepers offered me free meals, children waved from across the street, and strangers stopped to shake my hand. They called me generous, noble, even saintly, words that felt far heavier than the old coat I wore every day. But inside, I didn't feel like a saint. I just felt ordinary. I had done what I believed was right. Nothing more, nothing less. Still, it was impossible not to notice the ripples my actions caused. The abandoned warehouse we turned into a shelter was now full of life, laughter, conversations, even the smell of bread baking each morning. Volunteers came daily, some offering money, others just time or skill. I often sat quietly in a corner, watching the same people who once ignored me now working hand in hand to make the place better. It was beautiful, but beauty, I've learned, often attracts envy. One evening, as the sun sank behind the rooftops, a young reporter arrived at the shelter. She had that sharp, restless energy of someone who believed in uncovering the truth, or at least a version of it that would make headlines. "Mr. Harris," she said, adjusting her camera, "people say you gave away everything you owned, but others claim you're hiding something, that maybe you weren't as poor as you pretended to be." Her question hit me like a stone. The small crowd nearby went silent. I could feel their eyes burning into me, waiting, doubting, wondering. I smiled faintly. "Young lady," I said, "the truth is simpler than you think. I gave away what I had because I didn't need it anymore. The rest? I suppose I left it in the hands of fate." She frowned, clearly unsatisfied. I looked around. Faces that once trusted me now held questions. It's strange how quickly faith can waver when doubt is whispered into it. "If there's something left," I said softly, "then I hope it finds its way to those who need it most. But I assure you, I own nothing that can't be carried in a heart." The reporter left unsatisfied, but her story made its way into the papers the next morning. The headline read, "Local Philanthropist's Secret Fortune, Truth or Myth." Suddenly, I wasn't a hero anymore. I was a curiosity, a riddle people wanted to solve, a man they wanted to measure. Donations slowed, visitors hesitated, and the shelter's atmosphere shifted from warmth to suspicion. That night, I walked alone through the sleeping city. The wind was cold, sharp, and it bit through my thin jacket like needles. I passed by the same mansion I once owned, lights glowing, music spilling from the windows, laughter floating into the street. My son stood inside, visible through the glass, surrounded by his friends. He was wearing the watch I'd given him years ago, The one I told him symbolized integrity and compassion. He had traded both for comfort and approval. I turned away. Some lessons, I thought, can't be taught, only lived. When I returned to the shelter, I found it in chaos. The city inspectors were there, accompanied by police officers and reporters. Apparently, an anonymous tip had claimed the shelter was operating illegally. I stood frozen at the entrance as they tore through cabinets, boxes, and storage rooms, looking for something that wasn't there. I approached one of the officers calmly. "What's going on?" I asked. "Routine check," he muttered without looking at me. "We received information that funds were being misused." "Misused?" I repeated, almost amused. "By whom?" "The people who came here with nothing but hope." He didn't answer. But I saw the reporter again, her camera flashing as if trying to capture guilt that didn't exist. The residents looked frightened. Some whispered, some cried, and I realized my silence, my refusal to defend myself, was hurting them now. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I climbed onto a wooden chair in the middle of the room and raised my voice. "Listen to me," I said, and the noise slowly faded. "You all think there's some secret treasure I've hidden, some wealth I kept for myself. Let me tell you something. You're standing in it. This building, these walls, every brick, that's what I gave. My time, my home, my heart, everything you see here is what I have left." The officers stopped for a moment, uncertain. I continued, louder this time. "If the city wants to shut us down, let them. But they'll never shut down what's been built in this room. Kindness, unity, dignity. You can't confiscate that." Applause began. Quiet at first, then growing. The residents stood, clapping, cheering, crying. The inspectors looked uncomfortable, then quietly left. The reporter lowered her camera. Her expression had softened, almost ashamed. "I didn't know," she said quietly. I smiled. "Now you do." The story that came out the next day wasn't about scandal. It was about courage, about a man who refused to be silenced when compassion was questioned. Donations poured back in. Volunteers doubled. The shelter grew stronger than ever. But deep inside, I felt something else, an ache, a whisper telling me this wasn't over. There was still one thing left undone. That night, I opened the small wooden box I kept under my bed, the only personal possession I had left. Inside was an envelope, yellowed with age. My late wife's handwriting covered its front. "For when you've given enough." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter, and beneath it, a deed, not for property, but for land. An old field she and I had bought decades ago, intending to build a home for the elderly someday. I'd forgotten all about it. Or maybe I'd tried to. As I read her letter, her words filled my heart with both sorrow and strength. "If you're reading this, my love, then you've done what you always said you would. You've shared your heart with the world. But remember, love isn't finished until it shelters those who can no longer run from the rain." I looked up at the moonlight spilling through the window. It felt like she was still guiding me, still reminding me that giving isn't an act, it's a journey. I knew what I had to do next. The next morning, I walked through the quiet streets with that old deed tucked safely inside my coat. The air was crisp, filled with that faint scent of autumn decay and renewal, the way life always seems to die just to begin again. I made my way to City Hall, a place I hadn't entered in decades. The clerk behind the counter didn't recognize me, of course. To her, I was just another old man with tired eyes and a worn hat. "I'd like to donate a piece of land," I said, sliding the folded paper toward her. "For a new home. Not for profit, for people." She hesitated, glancing at the deed, then at me. "A home? You mean like a shelter?" "No," I said softly. "A sanctuary. For those who've spent their lives giving only to have no one left to give back to them." Her eyes softened as she looked at me, and for a moment, her professional mask cracked into something genuine. "That's beautiful," she said. "We'll make sure it happens." It took months. Endless paperwork, permits, approvals, but word spread fast. The city that once whispered rumors about me now rallied behind me. Local builders volunteered, retired craftsmen offered their skills. Students painted signs, and when the first cornerstone was finally laid, the entire block gathered to watch. The sign read, "The Haven, a home built from kindness." As the walls rose, I watched from the sidelines, hands clasped behind my back, a quiet smile tugging at the corners of my lips. I was too old to lift bricks or hammer nails, but I was there every day, offering something more: encouragement, stories, laughter. Sometimes the volunteers would ask about my past, and I'd tell them bits and pieces about my wife, about the choices I'd made, about how wealth without purpose is just another kind of poverty. When the building was finally complete, the mayor insisted on holding a grand opening ceremony. I tried to decline, but they wouldn't hear of it. "You've inspired this entire city," she said. "People need to see the face of what real generosity looks like." So, I stood on the small stage they built in front of the Haven, surrounded by hundreds of people. The poor, the wealthy, the young, the forgotten. Cameras flashed, microphones pointed, and for a moment, I felt that familiar discomfort. I had never wanted recognition. I had wanted connection. "Mr. Harris," the mayor said, handing me the microphone, "the city owes you a debt of gratitude." I looked out at the crowd, their faces blurred into a sea of light and hope. I took a breath and spoke. "I didn't build this," I began. "You did. Every person who lifted a hand, every neighbor who gave a meal, every stranger who chose kindness when it wasn't convenient. This is yours. I only gave what I could no longer use. But you gave what can never be taken away." The crowd went quiet. I could feel emotion stirring, a shared pulse running through everyone there. I continued, my voice trembling. "I've lived long enough to know that wealth doesn't buy peace. Fame doesn't buy meaning. And love, true love, only grows when it's given freely. I lost my family once, not because I didn't love them, but because I forgot that love must be shared, not expected. Today, standing here, I see what I'd been searching for all my life: a family made of strangers, bound by kindness." Applause erupted. Tears glistened on faces I didn't even know. And for the first time in years, I felt something inside me settle, like a storm finally coming to rest. After the ceremony, people came up one by one to thank me. Some brought flowers, others small gifts. One young man, no older than 20, handed me a folded photograph. It showed the shelter, bustling and alive. "You don't know me," he said, "but that place saved my life. I was going to give up before I found it. Now I volunteer there every weekend." I looked at the photo, then at him. "Then you've already done more than I ever could," I said, my voice thick. As evening fell, the crowd dispersed, leaving me standing alone in front of the building. The golden light of sunset bathed the Haven in a warm glow, as if blessing it. I felt my knees weaken slightly, and I sat down on a nearby bench. Funny, I thought, how everything comes full circle, from the park bench where I once sat alone to this one, surrounded by the echoes of everything I'd built. A soft voice interrupted my thoughts. "Mr. Harris?" I turned to see the reporter, the same one who had once accused me of hiding wealth. She looked different now, calmer, humbler. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "Your story changed me. I used to chase headlines. Now I chase humanity." I smiled. "Then I suppose we both learned something about value." She sat beside me in silence for a while, watching the light fade. "What will you do now?" she asked. I chuckled. "Now, I'll rest. Maybe plant a few flowers. Watch others build what I started. The world doesn't need more heroes, just more people who remember how to care." A soft wind stirred the air, carrying laughter from inside the building. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let it wash over me. For the first time, I felt at peace. Not because I had given everything away, but because I finally understood what it meant to truly have. Weeks later, I fell ill. Nothing serious at first, just the kind of exhaustion that comes from a life fully lived. I stayed in a small room inside the Haven, surrounded by those I once helped. They brought me soup, stories, and warmth. I watched them continue the work, feeding, sheltering, loving. It was the greatest reward I could have asked for. On my final night, I asked for one thing: to be taken outside. They wheeled my chair to the front porch, under the same stars I had watched with my wife so many years ago. I looked up, smiled, and whispered, "We did it, love." When morning came, the city woke to news that I had passed peacefully in my sleep. The front door of the Haven was covered in flowers, candles, and letters. People gathered again, not in mourning, but in gratitude, and someone, no one knows who, hung a small sign over the door. It read, "He gave everything, and in doing so, taught us we still had more to give." The reporter wrote my final story, but this time there were no questions, no doubts, just truth. The headline read, "The man who made a city remember its heart. And though I was gone, my gift remained. Not the money, not the land, but the spirit that spread like wildfire through every soul who heard my name." Because in the end, giving isn't about losing what you have. It's about discovering what was always inside you, waiting to be shared. And that, I think, is what left the entire city speechless.